I still have a hard time explaining the emotion that arrests me every time I walk into a Barnes & Noble. It's somehow both overwhelmingly enchanting and enchantingly overwhelming. Nowhere else is there such a tantalizing wealth of words, such a staggering sight as a million colorful spines, each a narrow patch that someone has knit into the motley quilt of humanity. Such an endless treasure of research, language, and story through which humans have endeavored to explain their existence. The smell of fresh paper, lightly scented with assorted aromas from the cafe, seasons the air. Low whispers mingle with a choir of softly turning pages to play a faint symphony that would be properly titled The Sound of Seeking. Patrons peruse the aisles, judging books by their covers until one of them catches their eye. They pull the book off the shelf and briefly run their fingers over it, satisfying their underutilized, waning sense of touch before opening it in hopes of enlightenment. The big bookstore has something to say to all of our senses. And in a time when brick-and-mortar businesses are hanging by a thread of tangibility, I'm grateful that such a place still exists. That's the enchanting part. The overwhelming part is that I want to read everything there, and I might as well try to count all the grains of sand at the beach. Every aisle shouts to me and waves its picket signs, warning me of the regret I'll have if I choose incorrectly. I have the same delighted dismay for the Cheesecake Factory and their voluminous and varied menu. I want everything on it, but my wallet is thin, and I'd prefer my build to tend more in that direction too. No, I still haven't decided what to order. But yes, I'd like some more bread in the meantime. And yes, when I've finally decided upon a delicacy and sufficiently savored it, it will take me just as long to decide on which of the 100 flavors of cheesecake will push my caloric intake even further over its limits. I'm not going to complain too much about the boundless collection of books at Barnes & Noble and the anxiety that the insurmountableness induces in my perfectionist psyche. What I am going to complain about is an experience I had once while I was there. I was fingering through some selections in the current affairs section when fittingly I was asked to adjust my mask, which I was begrudgingly wearing due to the store's policy at the time. It was well past the highest swells of COVID, when only large corporations in large cities were still requiring such. I smiled a hidden smile and said, "Sure," and gave it a tug upward. Less than 5 minutes later, the employee had circled back to check on me. The ratio of fabric to face was still not to his satisfaction, and he admonished me once again. I wasn't able to muster a smile that he couldn't see this time, but I made another adjustment. I also made for another section of the store, hoping to escape his patrol. He tracked me down, though, and the game of cat and mouse continued. Without getting into evidences and efficacies of facial coverings, suffice it to say that my experience in my favorite store was ruined that day. The temptation arose to walk out, to swear off the establishment altogether and walk those aisles no more. But where else would I go to satisfy my thirst for words? Where else could I venture down avenue after avenue of content to my heart's content? The book section at Walmart ends abruptly because the garbage bag section must begin, and my heart is not content with the content of modern romance novels anyway. The public library isn't bad, but it's limited in hours and square footage, and it doesn't have that new book smell, or vanilla bean cream frappuccinos. There's nowhere else to go. So no, I would not let one overzealous employee sever me from the treasure. I would not spurn everything I might have learned in future visits because of one irritating interaction. As far as physical world book browsing goes, Barnes & Noble has what I'm looking for. There is no other store. One author you're sure to find at Barnes & Noble is C.S. Lewis. And in his book, The Silver Chair, he tells the story of a girl named Jill who finds herself very thirsty during an adventure in a strange land called Narnia. She happens upon a beautiful stream, clear and bright as glass. The problem is, there's a lion lying in front of it. The lion in these chronicles is, of course, Aslan, and he speaks to her. "If you are thirsty, come and drink." Still frightened by being so near a lion and everything she's known lions to be capable of, she hesitates. "Are you not thirsty?" said the lion. "Oh, I am dying of thirst," said Jill. "Then drink," said the lion. Would you mind going away while I do?" said Jill. The lion answered this only by a look and a very low growl. And as Jill gazed at its motionless bulk, she realized that she might as well have asked the whole mountain to move aside for her convenience. The delicious rippling noise of the stream was driving her nearly frantic. "Will you promise not to do anything to me if I do come?" said Jill. "I make no promise," said the lion. Jill was so thirsty now that, without noticing it, she had come a step nearer. "Do you eat girls?" she asked. "I have swallowed up girls and boys, women and men, kings and emperors, cities and realms," said the lion. It didn't say this as if it were boasting, nor as if it were sorry, nor as if it were angry. It just said it. "I dare not come and drink," said Jill. "Then you will die of thirst," said the lion. "Oh dear," said Jill, coming another step nearer. "I suppose I must go and look for another stream then." "There is no other stream," said the lion. Another author you'll find at Barnes & Noble, at least at the time of this writing, is John. I don't know John's last name, but 5 of his books are contained in the New Testament. John was a great writer, perhaps best known for his treatises on truth. He loved explaining it, proclaiming it, and seeing people walk in it once they obtained it. In what we have delineated as the 6th chapter of his book chronicling the ministry of Jesus, he expounds at length the feeding of the 5,000 from the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes, and Jesus' subsequent teaching that he is the bread of life, sent from heaven just as the manna had been sent to their ancestors, that he is the food for our souls. He had just provided a miraculous meal, but its purpose was to reveal the real miracle, eternal salvation for all those that would follow him. This was too much to swallow for many that heard him speak that day. The crowd that had just been fed by his miraculous multiplication of bread divided and dispersed. They had their reasons, I'm sure. Following him would require some sacrifice, or they were just here for the meal and not interested in life-changing overtures at this time, or they were offended by a hard saying, or it was too hard to understand, or they understood, but it was too hard to give something else up, or they knew of a better way, or they just didn't believe that he was who he said he was. Whatever the reason, they walked his aisles no more. Jesus then turned to the dozen or so people that remained and asked, in what has to be one of the most painful questions in all of Scripture, "Will you also go away?" Simon Peter answered him, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We believe and are sure that thou art Christ, the Son of the living God." As much as Barnes & Noble has to offer, there's a place worth investigating that makes the bookstore's vast, kaleidoscopic patchwork of spines look like a bowl of candy corn. A place awash in perfect light where angels grace the aisles and all the books are true. But as sublime and wonderful as this place is, we've often struggled to point to it. It's as though we found the map and we know our destination, but still, we're amateur drivers. The panorama of predispositions among those trying to follow Christ is just as wide as it is among any other cross-section of people. A naturally cantankerous Christian may struggle all of his life to be as amiable as his atheist friend. Some have the gift of good cheer, some the endowments of endearment, and some the burden of terseness. And even the most kind have times of impoliteness. The most humble have times of smugness. The most generous have times of selfishness. But ultimately, the truth is independent from the minds that try to decipher it and the lips that try to deliver it. In other words, truth, especially the truth, is way too important to leave to someone else's demeanor. There are myriad ways I could have been offended by an employee at my favorite retail chain that day, or any day. He could have scoffed at a book or author that I asked him about. He could have given me incorrect directions to a book that I was looking for, if I were the type that asked for directions. He could have just been having a bad day and said something downright rude. The colloquialisms exchanged in the environment of a nice bookstore are in general far more polite, than in the rest of the world, especially the online world, where offenses, unintentional and otherwise, are far more prevalent. The fact remains, we're doing ourselves a huge disservice if we let the flaws of humanity keep us from the spoils of divinity. After dispersing from Christ's sermons, people went their own ways. They went looking for other stores and other streams. They've been looking ever since, following different teachers down different roads, pursuing more tangible treasures and more comfortable sayings, making new gods, seeking for shortcuts to the promised land. Inevitably, those paths dry up in the wilderness, and the gurus that led them there are long gone, leaving them alone in desperate desolation. I too have pondered what he had to say, and what those who were witnesses to what he had to say said about him. I too have wandered down other roads and wondered where else I can find meaning and truth. Those roads are always wide and interesting at first, but they always eventually feel like the book section at Walmart, vapid and irrelevant at worst, incomplete and inadequate at best. I'm not without questions, but as it pertains to where to find all the words of this life and of life eternal, I'm with Peter on this one. To whom else shall I go? Like Jill and her adventure, and our own chronicles of Earthia, if you will, we thirst. As I type this, my spell checker has twice turned the word thirst into Christ. I realized that it was because I was typing thrice, which is an orthographic neighbor to Christ. But it's a felicitous typo because it just so happens that Christ is the only way to quench what we most deeply thirst for. We're going to have to look the lion in the eye, though, and dare to drink of that living water. We will have to take some hard sayings to heart. We'll have to make some sacrifices and change some things. We will have to stand and speak when it's more convenient to sit in silence. We will have to endure some persecutions. We will have to, for all intents and purposes, be born again. But there's no better intent and no greater purpose. It may not be the easiest road to travel, but it's the only one that's not a dead end. There is no other way.